Yo, what's up, peeps? Welcome back to the Apostate's Bible Read. I'm Austin. This week we're going to be talking about Numbers 20 through 23 and why Moses is not allowed into the Promised Land. Yo, what's up? Welcome back to the Apostate's Bible Read as we are trying to zoom through the Bible in a year here. Picking up where we left off, we're going to be talking about Numbers chapters 20 through 23, and so basically the highlights are this. Moses is commanded by God to command this rock to release the waters. That's an important distinction. What Moses and Aaron end up doing is they go down to this rock, and Moses ends up striking the rock with his staff. The waters still flow, and that provides enough liquid, obviously, and hydration and sustenance and whatnot for the Israelites, but nevertheless, Aaron and Moses are punished. And the reason they're punished is because they didn't strictly obey God's rules. Now, there are a couple things I wanted to notice here, really two things. The first is, when I was younger, when I read this, and then when you look at they have like these teaching cartoons that they'll give in Sunday schools and stuff like that. And whenever they taught this story, they always kind of showed that it was like a little rock. Not like a little rock, but like, a stone that I could probably pick up with a few dudes or something like that. But I think it's better to think of this as like a cliff. Think of a waterfall and a cliff, and Moses is commanding the opening of a huge stream or almost a small river, right? Like, I don't think it's just a little fountain, which is kind of how I always previously understood it. Why that's important is because one of the things that the writers here are trying to do is they're trying to incorporate the terrain and the geography of the Promised Land, or of the areas in the desert outside the Promised Land, into a sort of theological narrative, right? So why is this area named this particular thing? Well, it's named this particular thing because it's given a particular theological significance, and so this story is meant to support that and to legitimate that. It's a way of myth-making, not just myth-making in the sense of like creating a fake story. That's a lot of times how people use the word myth. But more importantly, to create a narrative that enjoins the reasons and rationality and legitimation from a kind of more practical perspective with the also theological and the spiritual and the transcendent, and they combine them into a particular myth or narrative like this. So that's, I think, something that's really important. And then, of course, the second point being that Moses and Aaron are disallowed from entering the Promised Land. We see in this section in 20 through 23 that Aaron ends up dying, and he ends up then bequeathing responsibilities of the high priest of Israel to his son Eleazar, who now becomes the high priest. And that's extremely important because they disobeyed God's command. And I think, what to think about this? Is it just that Moses is stubborn and he didn't listen precisely to God's rules, and God is a stickler for following exactly the rules of God, or he will punish you? I mean, maybe there's something there to that as well. But I think more importantly, what it's trying to say is that no human being is ultimately above God's commands. We talked about this a couple episodes, that behind the law is God. The law is there as a temporary placeholder, as a reminder, as a sort of administrative mechanism, as a techne, as a tool of organization and administration. And it has other elements that kind of we could talk about as well, but I think one of the things that's really important to understand here is that God is ultimately behind it, and that is why it's important to reaffirm, to remind the Israelites that no one, not even the high priest or not even Moses, is above the power of God, and that it is God that ultimately founds and grounds the legitimacy of the law, the legitimacy of Israel, the legitimacy of the community. And so that's kind of, I think, the main point here. Then you get more people grumbling, people complaining, as you're going to see again constantly throughout the Old Testament. Oh, the Israelites are like, you took us out of Egypt so that we'll die and starve, and then God provides manna. And then it's like, oh, you took us out here so that we get crushed by our enemies, and then God delivers them victory over, some of the members of whatever the tribes are that they run into. So they're complaining, and so God sends some snakes. The snakes bite them, and if you get bit by these poisonous snakes, you die. But then Moses crafts this bronze snake, this big, huge pole that can be erected in the middle of the encampment, and if you get bitten, if you look up at the snake, then you'll be saved. So there is, again, salvation in God. There's a path forward, a way of making sure that you rely on and you trust God, even in the midst of these, impossible situations or uncomfortable situations that are thrown your way. The uncomfortable situation here being fucking snakes thrown their way. You can either grumble and you can complain and you can mistrust, or you can rely and you can express fidelity and faithfulness and recommit yourself to the truth that you know that God will ultimately carry through and deliver. And that's the point of what's going on here. And then, of course, there's this bit about Balaam and Balaam's donkey, and Balaam kind of disobeys God and wants to go one way rather than the other way. And so, you know, the angel of the Lord appears, and Balaam's riding on his ass, his donkey, and the donkey, like, goes off the road, and Balaam, like, gets all pissed off at his donkey because he doesn't have eyes to see. And it's an interesting story. And there's a lot to talk about there. But what I really want to talk about is that there is this song later where it talks about how this star is going to be rising from Jacob. And the thing that's important here is we need to start really thinking about messianic expectations. So in line with this persistence of people grumbling and then seeking deliverance, or people grumbling and then God providing redemption or deliverance, there starts to become this more apocalyptic sense that the end is coming, that the time is drawing near for the fulfillment, the time where there will no longer be this back and forth, this fall and then rise, missing out, sinning, right? It means to miss the mark, you know, and then of course being brought back in, and that there won't be this dissonance anymore, and there won't be this contradiction, but rather it will be pure, perfect harmony, that cosmos will be restored, that decay, justice will be brought about, that the world will be brought to rights, is what certain theologians talk about. You see this idea that a star is going to rise out of Egypt, and this is oftentimes used as a messianic passage, that this star is going to rise from Jacob / Israel, remember the name, and that star will be the kind of symbol that everybody can look up to. So rather than looking simply up at the snake that is the temporary fix for the temporary problem, the celestial star is the deliverance of all of the cosmos. And that is why this star will be the North Star, the guiding star, the beacon, the ultimate celestial transformation, that the world itself that is groaning and that is subjected to these contradictions and these problems and pestilence and famine and war, all of that will be taken care of and will be brought into a harmonious order, and that is through the Messiah. So we start to see that as this text as being written during either Babylonian captivity or you know, in the Second Temple time by these Levitical scribes, that there is this anticipation for this star to come. And so this text is a reminder, right? Not only to legitimate the priesthood and to remind people about the law and to establish order and administration, but also to provide hope so that when they get out of bondage, that will be a bondage that they've been delivered because of the promise of God, or that they've been delivered from because of the promise of God, because the star, the Messiah, is coming. He's almost here. Mashiach is on his way. So I think that's really important to kind of start to pay attention to as well. All right, sweet. So that's what we're going to tackle today. I'll be back in the next day or two with another video. We're going to probably try to finish Numbers here this week so that we can get into Deuteronomy and wrap up the Torah in maybe the next couple weeks, or definitely before the end of the month. So, all right, guys, like, subscribe, turn on notifications, get your friends involved, etc., etc. Let's grow this freaking channel, get some people involved. I love ya. Peace.